welcome to Incorruptible Mass. Our mission here is to help us all transform state politics. We know that we can have legislators and legislation that truly represents the needs of the vast majority of the residents of our beautiful state. And today we are talking about public banking. We're so excited to have an excellent guest with us. We're going to talk about why we need public banking and how it can help municipalities as well as small businesses. We're going to be talking about how it might affect communities of color, women-owned businesses, cooperatives, small farms, and other folks. We're going to be talking about the movement across the country for public banking, as well as public bank that has existed for 100 years or more and is wildly successful and how great it is. And then we will dive into a super wonky little subject at the end about the Mass Municipal Deposit Trust, which we hope to do a whole podcast on later. But before we get into this, I would love to have my fantabulous co-hosts introduce themselves. I will start with Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his, joining from Boston, the snowy town of Boston right now. And I've been working on different issue and electoral campaigns in Boston and Massachusetts over the past decade.
Wonderful. And Jordan.
Jordan Berg Powers, he, him, and I am in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I care a lot about public banking, so I'm really excited about this conversation.
Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford. Love local politics, love state politics, and I'm especially, I am so excited about public banking. I really want to get some public banking going, whether it's statewide or regional or whatever it is. I'm so excited about how it is something that state level can truly benefit municipalities. And I want to introduce our amazing guest, Nancy Ryan, who is here to talk about public banking in Massachusetts and is with the Mass Public Banking Coalition. Nancy, would you introduce yourself, how you got into this, and a little bit about your organization and its mission?
Sure, I'd love to. And I want people to just, I'll say this on a regular basis, check out masspublicbanking.org. Almost everything you want to know about our effort to create a Massachusetts public bank and other public banks, you'll find there. I come out of the feminist movement. I was director of the New Bedford Women's Center for a while. For 25 years, I was director of the City of Cambridge Women's Commission. And in that role, I did a lot of work on economic justice and got to know a lot about women struggling to create businesses and to be entrepreneurs, because in many ways our economy has only a small sector of room for people who don't fit into the traditional economic models. So I was working on some affordable housing in Cambridge, and I was approached by someone who said, "Hey, I'm working on a public bank. What do you think?" And I said, "Wow, I don't know anything about public banks." So if you out there are listening and you don't know anything about public banks, you're in great company. For the last 3 years, I've been swimming with a lot of wonderful colleagues in the world of public banking. So I'll just say a few things about a public bank and the one that we're trying to create in Massachusetts. It's not a retail bank. It's not a bank that you would go to. It will not have branches. It may have an office in Boston and an office somewhere in Western Mass. It's a bank to create affordable credit for small businesses, particularly Black, Brown, women, Indigenous-owned businesses, and also small farms, land trusts, cooperative workplaces, places that don't have access to traditional credit. One of the groups that we're working with in our coalition is the fabulous Commonwealth Kitchen. I think people probably know a lot about that. It's 80% of their clients are women of color, low-income women of color, and they're interested in creating businesses based on food service. And so the Commonwealth Kitchen teaches them everything they need to know about business practice, ordering food, creating either a food truck or eventually sometimes an actual brick and mortar. But mostly they come out of all of this incredible preparation and they can't get credit. They may have a personal credit history or maybe no credit history. And and so there are examples of the struggles of those women that have really inspired us to say this bank has a place in Massachusetts. And I think one of the wonderful success stories is um, one of the immigrant groups, a Jamaican woman who was able to establish first a catering business and then a food truck and then 3 food trucks and eventually 2 brick and mortars, because she found people who believed in her and slowly built up her credit. But she said, another woman that we met with who's part of Commonwealth Kitchen who created a cookie business, she said, oh, wow. She said, I created my business. I have $100,000 in my local bank and they won't give me a credit line. So we're finding that there is a need, and that need got really blown up in COVID, where we saw hundreds and hundreds of businesses, especially in low-income communities in Massachusetts, go under. So that's the outline. It's
And
to
if I
create
may, yes,
low-income credit.
great. But if I may, I want to also bring up, I mean, I'm a city councilor now, so I want to bring up the idea of having money available for cities and towns. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that every city and town in Massachusetts borrows money in order to do different capital projects or roads, buildings, all sorts of things. They borrow money and then they pay a lot of not just interest and fees, but all sorts of other things tacked on, like millions of dollars that ends up going to Wall Street banks and like literally is leaving the state and going off to the already hyper wealthy people. And that a public bank could service every municipality and town in Massachusetts and really benefit every single person who lives in Massachusetts. Does that sound accurate?
Sort of. It really would benefit small cities and towns that don't have the money to go to the bond market because it's so expensive. You've got lawyers' fees and bond fees and all kinds of expenses that go into bonding. So we envision a small town that has a climate mitigation project that they'd like to fund. And climate mitigation is another one of our priorities. We've written priorities into the bill so that where we've seen unmet needs. So that would be an example. City of Cambridge, City of Boston doesn't need that, but there are a lot of small towns.
If I may, can't those more medium-sized cities save money and not be paying all that money out to Wall Street? Wouldn't they be able to use
Yes.
the state municipal bank and simply save their
Yes, they
residents
would.
millions of dollars? Great, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah,
Great.
we were talking about the Metro Mayors Coalition is a member of our coalition, and those are about 28 cities and towns in and around the metro area of Boston, and they love the bank because,
Yeah.
and I know Melrose is one of them, and so many of the cities and the mayors and the city council members like yourself, they meet the people on the ground who have the vision for a piece of work, whether it's an enterprise or whether it's a project, and they cannot access traditional forms of funding. They can't get banks to loan to them because of all the reasons that a bank will give. So we think this is going to inspire a lot of creativity around the state. The governor's talking about, oh, we want Massachusetts to be competitive. You need to be competitive at the grassroots level, not just at the high-tech level. And to make our cities and towns healthier and more robust, we need to give opportunities for projects and organizations to borrow.
Yeah, I just want to use an example that I was thinking about so we had this business that was de-leaded our 3-decker, and it was funded by sort of a public money, and it was a project that helped mostly formerly incarcerated or youth at the margins, people who were looking to sort of get some support and get some skills. And they got skills on de-leading. It was a project that really supported sort of mostly Black and brown young folks in the city of Worcester to do work in the city of Worcester. Excuse me. And then the funding for it went away. And then the organization went away. And then all of those young people who now had those skill sets, they either had to be hired by someone, or more likely, they just lost that opportunity. And, and so we're recently going through a sort of more deletting of our three-decker on the outside, and some of the places where what they do is they just board up the thing rather than trying to delet it, and they're going to try and delet some of those places. And now the people who are coming to our house to do that are all some of the usual suspects, and many of them don't live in Worcester. And so this is, again, like a place where a public bank could have backfilled to continue the opportunity when the money for the program ran out, right? Like that was a business that could have totally succeeded, but didn't have the access to any sort of, like, who is going to fund it? Bank of America is not giving a loan for that.
No,
And so I think that's the sort of thing that I think when we think about, like, you do this great program, you gave all of these young skills opportunity and a future and thinking, and then when the money dries up, that dries up.
So here's what the bank can do, because we spent a lot of time on this. It's an absolutely eligible project in terms of the bills that we've written. And one of our goals is to make unbankable groups bankable. So they get technical assistance throughout all that. We have a whole network of community development corporations and CDFIs, community development finance institutions. I think there's over 20 of them around the state, and they do technical assistance, and we're partnering with them in terms of the bank effort, and that organization would become hopefully bankable into the future, so able to borrow from traditional sources once they get a credit record. So it's a perfect example of what the bank could do.
The one thing I wanted to kind of underscore as well is, kind of, Nancy, when you were talking about the way that climate mitigation is one of the kind of particularly written in purposes for the bank, of how important that is to be able to kind of say with the public bank that we can set some of those mission, kind of like set the mission for it of what do we want to see in the general ecosystem of the economy if we want to see kind of more climate resilience, if we want to make sure that we can shift kind of the kind of agricultural sphere so that we can still have small farmers and they don't get gobbled up into large big ag, as well as more ecological farms. If we want to make sure that we have kind of more women-owned businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses, and that kind of worker-owned businesses, all of that requires a certain degree of intentionality. And that's something that can be a part of a public bank's fundamental mission, in which any other bank that might be kind of a specific program, if somebody's driving it, that they decide that they're willing to do more and willing to take on certain risks. But that's not going to be like a fundamental integrated mission in the same way, where I think, and that what it also does, as you're kind of to your point about making some of the unbankable bankable, is that the public bank can help make folks who wouldn't have access in the standard markets suddenly have the ability to gain that. So it's like that it not only just helps them start off, and that it opens up continual opportunities thereafter.
I want to say that this effort to create a Massachusetts public bank is totally mission driven. And I think you'll see that if people go to our website, and you'll see that we have priority recipients specifically laid out. And we've looked at what we think are the needs at the grassroots level, and we've built those into the proposal for the bank. There are two bills trying to get through the legislature. It's kind of a slog, but we're in the Joint Committee on Financial Institutions. And
how could you say it's a slog? Everything, getting progressive stuff through the State House is a piece of cake, right?
I know. Well, the problem is you say the word bank and people freak out.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the banking industry puts money into legislative coffers, and they have kind of decided that the bank is a competitor and not an encouragement of people, as I just said to Jordan's example, to become bankable in the traditional sector. So we have built this to be very concretely mission driven. And there's a structure with an advisory committee that has very specific interests of the kinds of needs built into the advisory process, and an open portal for feedback. So we're really, it's very concrete in that
Great.
way.
So I hope people are getting excited about this conversation. I know I am. We have a lot more to cover in terms of, putting this in the context of the country and everything. But before we go on, we do want to mention that, we need your donations in order to keep presenting this podcast. We really need, and Jordan, I want you to chime in here. We need to have progressive voices in our media that are available. This is the kind of story, and everything we cover are the kinds of stories you will not hear anywhere else, the kind of analysis that you will not hear anywhere else. So please, there's a link below. You can donate, and it just makes sure that our podcast is able to, have the graphics and the music and the editing and all of those things, which are done by some fabulous young people that are on our team. It allows us to make sure that they get paid appropriately. Jordan, I want you to say one word about the need for progressive voices and progressive media.
Yeah, no, just, in this context, I think we take for granted that a lot of the ways in which our media system works but it works for people who own it, and they are almost always outside of the regular class of folks and outside of regular people, and they continually normalize really right-wing ideas. My favorite example of this is that they treat people who are tax absolutists, who oppose any sort of forms of taxation, as the same as people who ask for modest changes to our taxation to make some adult decisions about, like, what are we doing as a society, right? Like, they treat people who would have functionally no money for any of the things we do, schools, anything else, as the same as people who are trying to figure out if we could tax 2 to 3% more. If so, what is the right mixture to both continue to do the things we want to do and also provide for people who need it? And so that sort of asymmetry goes on in our regular media, and that's why it's really important that we continue to support and fund places where people can have more adult conversation. No one is having an adult conversation about about public banks and the need for this types of policy in other places, despite the fact that it would have a real impact on real people's lives. We're not talking about whether or not it's going to help a politician or hurt a politician's chances of winning. We're not talking about it in the context of a false binary party systems. We're having a discussion about what this policy could do, and it's so needed, but it doesn't just happen. And there's some great young people who support making this possible, that giving to this does.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your support. Go ahead.
Media someday. We might build small media into the bank mission. Grassroots media. So
great.
There's room for expansion.
Well, Nancy, I would love if you can tell us a little bit about, you said that this is part of a movement around the country. Can you talk to us a little bit about other places that are either have a public bank or are looking for a public bank?
Well, the so-called original public bank, there used to be tons of public banks, but in North Dakota in 1918, during a depression, a bunch of farmers were trying to save their small farms, and the traditional financial sector wouldn't give them credit. And they happened to have a socialist perspective. They went to the legislature. They basically got lots of them elected to the legislature. North Dakota created a public bank. The farms were saved, and it has been in business since 1918. And during COVID, it had one of the most successful maintenances of homes and farms that were not lost because of lack of ability to get credit during COVID. So you talk to people in Massachusetts, they say, "Oh, we're so different than North Dakota." Well, yes and no. North Dakota has really been an exceptional leader. So, and we sometimes bring the North Dakota leadership to meetings on Zoom to talk to us about how they've done it. But right now, New York City has a huge project going to try to create a public bank for the city, as does Philadelphia. And the most recent public bank is in the East Bay in California. California state legislature created enabling legislation a number of years ago to allow cities and towns and counties to create public banks on their own. So 3 counties got together in the East Bay, and they've actually successfully capitalized a public bank. They've just hired their CEO. So there's a whole public bank coalition that our co-chair Ruth Kaplan is part of, countrywide. So we're part of a movement, but the movement is not moving quickly, in large part because we depend on traditional voices who don't have a sense of how we can expand our economy to work for everybody. And that's really what's at the base of the mission of the public bank. We can create an economic structure that isn't owned or operated by the private sector to meet the needs of people at the grassroots levels and build them up, and thereby build up parts of the state that, like the farmers in North Dakota, so many small farms were at risk during COVID. And we found that out. One of our bill co-sponsors is from New Bedford, and Rep. Cabral, Tony Cabral, and he said his staff told me stories about a farm owned by a woman whose barn burned down, and she could not get financing to rebuild it, and it put her whole enterprise in jeopardy. And this is the classic kind of thing that where the bank can step in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about, so if we're actually, let's say we're going to actually create a public bank, statewide, a statewide public bank, which is, I think, what the legislation you're talking about going through the state legislature is for, not just enabling legislation for regional, but actually the creation of one. Talk a little bit about capitalizing. What is that, and what would it look like?
Well, we've used a lot of expertise to figure out what a small public bank in Massachusetts would look like. And capitalization is simply the money that becomes the base, the foundation of the bank. It's the backup for everything else. And so we've analyzed that we needed about $200 million of state money. We've built in the possibility of $50 million once each of the next 4 years to capitalize the bank. And then we've talked about using funds that are already being banked at the Mass Municipal Deposit Trust by cities and towns in the state, what people call slow money, not needed right at the moment, to be able to be used for the basis of the loans. And if with that 200 million in as the capitalization and using money from the Mass Municipal Trust, we could be loaning out about $1.4 billion in small loans. That's what our experts tell us. And we actually have a 40-page testimony to the legislature on our website. So if all the nerds out there are interested, you can read the analysis of how the bank will be able to use that money to provide 8 to 10 times the amount of capitalization. It's very exciting. Banks are a unique institution in our economy, and they've become totally privatized, whereas at one time there was a lot more public banking. So we're trying to go back in time to create something that really could work using funds that are already available.
And I'm just going to chime in with like, hey, used to be that our public colleges and universities were mostly funded, and people barely had to pay anything. We're not asking for crazy stuff. We're asking for stuff that used to exist in America, not just in other countries. Like, this stuff used to be the norm, and now we can't. People act like it's some sort of wacko, crazy idea, but it's really not.
And there are public banks all over Europe. Particularly in Germany, but in other European countries that have functioned for decades and decades incredibly successfully and built up the sectors that couldn't get the credit. So,
and amazingly enough, there are still private German banks, despite despite these public banks somehow you know, somehow the one of the largest banks in the world, and you know, happens to be German. Imagine that.
They didn't die immediately.
They didn't
that's
die immediately.
that's what's always wild to me, that whenever there is hostility from some of the like larger mainstream financial institutions to the creation of a public bank, when the public bank's main mission is to fill the space of the unbankable, like that like
Well, it was
Yeah, I mean,
interesting, and
Serve the people that the banks
but
are refusing to serve right now.
yeah.
But
Right.
it isn't just, I guess it's not
Yeah.
just that. I want to say, I do want to say why that is, because I think it's important to note that it's also just, there are fees that they're currently taking off the top that are wasteful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like they are currently a waste to the system. They bank Massachusetts in a way that costs you, regular person, money that you need not be charged. I mean, there
Right.
isn't just it isn't just that they're like needlessly dumb, because they are that too. I want to say that none of these people are bright bulbs. They could easily be before a crafting of a public bank that would work for them and still make them money. But it's not just, they just oppose it because they're not the brightest bulbs, but also it's greed. Like they want to be able to continue a system that is totally opaque, that regular legislators do not understand and do not have access to. You have to get special access to get information for a lot of these things, or you have to know the right person who can point you in the right direction to figure out where the bond market website is. Like I happen to have it up because it's not Googleable. So I always have it up so that I can, like, if I'm curious, I can search it because I can't find it otherwise. It's not easy information to get a hold of, and your elected officials have less ability to understand this than like other folks, and so they're not banking professionals, they're not bond professionals, so you know, the banks benefit from an opaque system that most people don't understand, that has little to no oversight, where they can charge exorbitant fees, right? Like they charge fees for things that we don't even know they're charging fees for.
That's
I
right.
once asked the treasurer to give me, like, how much money are you spending on these things? And no one could tell me for sure. Because no one's ever done a real audit of it. No one could tell me for sure where's our money going? How much are we spending as a state? What is our fine? Like no one could give me that report. And so I'm sure it's out there. Like I'm not saying it's impossible to find out, but it's just like we're not even the legislators not oversighting this. There's nobody looking at the whole total picture. And so they have a real interest in keeping this sort of system in place. And that's to the detriment of you. And I just think for an institution that should be concerned with democratic oversight as a whole, we should have a public bank is a system that says very clearly that we can provide what our municipalities need, because they're all borrowing money to some extent or another for projects in their place, that we could provide that at a low cost, that's publicly available, that has oversight by a democratic oversight, and is working on projects that often go unbanked, that are
Yes.
often in the margins, that often don't matter to a banker whose only thought is, how can I get 9 to 10 or 12% return on this thing? They don't really care about whether or not how it'll help them.
And I'm just going to jump in super quick with Medford. Medford is a city of like 55,000 people, not a big city, right? As we have like a $200 million a year budget, and around $5 or $6 million a year is servicing our debt. $5 or $6 million a year we spend servicing our debt. That's fees, interest, you name it, other weird, bizarre things you've never heard of tacked on. $5 or $6 million a year. And we're not big. Imagine how much, Boston is spending. I mean, I can't even imagine how many millions of dollars a year they're spending just servicing their debt.
Yeah. So I do think we need to be clear about that and just say, like, really clearly, it would require our legislature to put us over power first, to put us first. But it's not a big ask. It's not something that doesn't exist. And it's something that has existed. And I'll segue us. We dabble in this already. So I learned beforehand, Nancy very nicely introduced us to Mass Municipal Deposit Trust, which was created in 1975. Do you want to talk, Nancy, just really quickly, just like a really 2-sentence introduction to what it is? And this is already sort of a dabble.
Well, the state and cities and towns put what they call their slow money into the Mass Municipal Deposit Trust. And through that, they can buy bonds for a year at a time. And also they can put cash in, which often goes out to the traditional big banking sector for investment. They get pretty small return to the cities and towns for what they do, but it's a very safe investment for money that they're not using at the time. So
And I'm going
Sure.
to let me for our listeners, let me just clarify. This is money that a city has and they invest it. This is not money that a city borrows.
right.
That's the gap.
Mhm.
Yeah. So and it's little bits of money. So currently it's like if let's say you have some extra money and you want to make a quick return on it, or your retirement fund and you want like a 1-year return or some sort of thing like that, or some sort of formal entity attached to a government. So maybe you're a teacher's trust fund, or you're some sort of trust fund or something like that. You can invest in this Mass Municipal Deposit Trust and get a return, which they are returning. It's not nothing. It's actually pretty good. It's a good return. It's not necessarily, it's not 25% or 20%, but it's like a good return on your investment. So it's a quick and easy way to sort of take some money and make some more money. I think what's important about it is that in 1975, Massachusetts realized that there was a need for something that the banks were not solely helping, and that they needed to create something underneath the Department of Treasury to help them make some short-term investments and get some good return. And this is largely, again, outside of the public, but it is at least it's oversighted by the Treasury. It has a public website. You can easily find it. That's going out there. And it's mostly in U.S. Treasuries, but it does have other investments. But it's got $30 billion in available funds. So if you're looking to capitalize, say, a public bank, there's some money right there that can help capitalize.
Yeah, they have 30 billion, and the public bank is looking for 200 million. They have 30 billion. The bank is looking for 200 million to capitalize.
And also, again, this isn't, Massachusetts did this. So it's not like Massachusetts can't do this. Massachusetts already took its legislature in the 1970s was already dabbled in this. It filled a gap for local and small trusts, municipalities, other things to help it at least invest in short term. And so it's not like we could do this. Like it's not a like, again, like we're creating something out of nothing that we've never done before. It's like this exists and it already is working and it's already available. This is another form of the stuff that they're already doing.
So I'm going to wrap us up because I know we have run a little bit long today. By the way, we are definitely going to have one where we dig into this Mass Municipal Deposit Trust because Jordan is fascinated by this and we're all excited to learn more.
Yes. Oh my God.
So Nancy's going to set us up for a future podcast on this. So if you want to know more, we are going to make sure to keep it not too wonky. We're going to dig in and help you understand what is going on. But Nancy, I would love to give you the last word and let our listeners know how they can help, how they can get involved, what they can do to help us get a public bank.
Yeah. Well, right now, we need to get past what's called Joint Rule 10, which is February 7th. And that's when the joint committees report out the bills that they're willing to keep working on. So call your state rep and your state senators and let them know that you want support for House Bill 975 and Senate Bill 632. Reps Conley and Cabral on the House side and Senator Jamie Eldridge on the Senate side. But the more that the folks hear about it, the better. So, and check out masspublicbanking.org to get suggestions of the sample letters you can write. There's ways to connect with your legislators on that website. So, and communicate back to us anything that you find out or questions that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to all our listeners, and we look forward to chatting with you all next week. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.